Following the birth of my first child, I engaged in an extramarital relationship. I am currently experiencing a profound sense of trepidation regarding the potential loss of this relationship. I am concerned that my fiancé may terminate our engagement, and I am fully aware that my actions were misguided. I am seeking guidance on the necessary steps to take to prevent any further missteps. I have made a series of misguided decisions that could potentially jeopardize the stability of my relationship with my fiancé. We welcomed our daughter into the world 5 months ago, and it was an immensely joyful moment in our lives. However, my regrettable choices have led me to fear that I might lose everything. I met my fiancé almost 10 years ago. My parents were exceptionally strict and seldom allowed me to attend or host parties. I had a typical upbringing with my parents and 2 sisters since I was a child. I eagerly anticipated my 18th birthday because I knew it would grant me a bit of freedom. I had a friend named Anna who had a much more relaxed upbringing as an only child. She promised to throw a birthday party for me at her house. My parents eventually consented to my attendance at a birthday party held at Anna's residence. However, they stipulated that I should be accompanied by my elder sister. Anna assisted me in my preparations, even lending me her most elegant dress. The party was a remarkable experience, but there was another aspect that particularly caught my attention. Chris, the focal point of attention at my own birthday celebration, was the subject of my fascination. I found him to be remarkably self-assured and attractive. He was assured and attractive, and it seemed that others felt the same way. I was too shy to approach him, but Anna did not share my hesitation after talking to Chris. Anna confessed to having a crush on him, which surprised me since she was not someone who developed crushes quickly. Chris had a unique blend of charm and a hint of arrogance that drew Anna to him. 2 weeks later, I bumped into Chris at the grocery store. He remembered me as the birthday girl, and we struck up a conversation. Initially, I was quite reserved because I had limited experience with boys. However, Chris was warm and friendly, which made it much easier for me to connect with him. Eventually, Anna, Chris, and I formed a close trio and began doing new things together. I had feelings for Chris, but I pushed them aside because Anna had already confessed her attraction to him a year later. Chris and Anna began dating, so I decided to give them space and not be a third wheel. They dated for another year, but then something happened. She confided in me that she had gotten drunk at a party and cheated on Chris. I kept a secret from him, but unfortunately, Anna continued to cheat on him multiple times. Eventually, Chris discovered her infidelity and they broke up. Anna blamed me for their breakup and accused me of betraying her secret. I tried to explain that I hadn't told him, but she didn't believe me, and that marked the end of our friendship. Anna moved away with her parents and Chris went to New York to study law. I subsequently gained admission to university shortly after these events. I subsequently graduated from university and relocated to New York for work. I encountered Chris when he visited the boutique where I was employed. Our encounter was a shock for both of us, and we spent hours catching up and discussing life. It felt like a dream to see my former romantic interest again. I was astonished. I learned that Chris had become a successful lawyer at a prestigious firm. I will not mention the name for privacy reasons and was making a 6-figure income. It can be reasonably assumed that Chris's monthly income was derived from a source of wealth. His parents were evidently well off. I was employed as a fashion designer at a luxury boutique, which I will not name. Chris frequently visited me, and our friendship was rekindled after a year of flirting. He asked me out, and I accepted. Our relationship grew increasingly serious, and we could not bear to spend a day apart. Chris's female colleagues envied me because he proudly brought me to his workplace. Life was going well, and I was living the life I had always envisioned. On my birthday, a few months later, Chris surprised me with a generous gift of $500. I was extremely grateful for the capital provided, which enabled me to start my own boutique 1 year later. My boutique was thriving, and I had the resources to establish 5 more. Chris received a promotion, and together we earned more than enough to sustain ourselves after his promotion. Chris proposed to me, and I joyfully accepted. I was so excited that I did not hesitate to share the news on my Instagram account. Subsequently, Chris purchased a house and invited me to move in with him. My parents initially wanted us to marry first, but I convinced them otherwise. I had envisioned a perfect wedding with Chris and was reluctant to rush into it. By that time, I had already met Chris's parents, who were kind but shared the traditional belief that we should marry before living together. Chris mentioned that his family was quite traditional, much like mine, and they held after persistent discussions. Chris's parents eventually agreed to our decision to live together. Our life together was exceptional, and I fell more deeply in love with him every day. He was caring, exceptionally generous, and incredibly loving. I felt like the most cherished woman in the world. Even during disagreements, Chris never raised his voice or responded with anger. He remained composed and willing to listen to me. Furthermore, he provided excellent care for me when I was unwell, at times even missing work to be with me. I treasured every moment with him, often doubting whether I truly deserved such a wonderful partner. Several months later, we decided to start a family after weeks of trying. I became pregnant, which brought immense joy to Chris. I could see the excitement in his eyes when I shared the news. He became incredibly attentive and protective during my stress. The experience of giving birth to our daughter was a positive one. Chris's love for me increased significantly, and despite my insecurities about my postpartum body, he actively supported me in regaining my confidence. Our daughter added even more happiness to our already content life, enhancing it significantly. I posted a series of pictures and videos featuring Chris, our daughter, and me in a joint Instagram post at the time. I only had around 1,000 followers on Instagram at the time. I had not anticipated the level of engagement that those posts received on Instagram. Chris was relatively popular on the platform, so I did not expect people to take such a keen interest in our personal lives. If I had not made those posts, I would not be in the predicament I am now, 3 months after our daughter's birth. Chris embarked on a 3-week work trip to Italy, which was challenging for me to part with him for such an extended period. However, he had work commitments and this trip was essential. The first week without him felt depressing and monotonous. I attempted to focus on my work and our daughter, but nothing seemed to genuinely excite me. I anticipated that it would be challenging, but the level of engagement that those posts received on Instagram was unexpected. The week-long work trip to Italy proved challenging for me, as I was unable to part with him for such an extended period. However, Chris had already taken time off after our daughter's birth, and this trip was essential. During the first week without him, I experienced feelings of depression and monotony. I attempted to focus on my work and our daughter, but I found it difficult to engage with anything genuinely exciting. I had anticipated that it would be challenging, but the level of depression I experienced was unexpected. Chris had been a constant presence in my life, and I had grown accustomed to it prior to his work trip. The longest period we had spent apart was 3 days, while Chris called me daily. However, this did not suffice for me. I longed for every aspect of him. Despite the fact that it had only been a week, it felt like a month had passed. One day, my personal assistant noticed my downcast mood. Despite my initial reluctance, I was persuaded by my assistant to attend a social gathering that I had not previously experienced. She assured me that it would provide a welcome distraction. I discussed the matter with Chris, who encouraged me to go, expressing concern about my tired appearance during our video calls. I dropped off our daughter at his mother's house before attending the party that evening. I wore a modest black evening gown with no intention of seeking a new partner, as I was already extremely proud of Chris. I limited myself to just 1 drink at the party, determined not to become intoxicated after 2 hours. I was eager to return home and spend time with my daughter. As I was leaving, I encountered a man named Roy who was nearly as tall as Chris and bore a striking resemblance to him. I had to take a second look to spot the subtle differences, primarily in the eyes and facial features. Chris was also more muscular than Roy, which was unexpected. Roy offered to buy me a drink after introducing himself. I initially declined, but he insisted, and I was uncomfortable with the idea of a stranger buying me a drink. I attempted to walk away, but Roy said something that halted me in my tracks. He mentioned that he was a friend of Chris and that Chris had asked him to keep me company. I found this peculiar. As Chris had never introduced me to Roy before, I was perplexed by Roy's assertion that he did not reside in New York. However, he did share some details about Chris, which I believed to be true. Roy then proceeded to buy me a drink, which I regrettably consumed after another. I began to feel dizzy and developed a headache. I informed Roy that I wanted to go home, and he offered to drive me. He then offered to drive me home. I fell asleep in the car and only woke up when he tapped me gently. He informed me that we had already arrived home. He helped me out of the car, but I soon realized that we were not at my home. I inquired about our location and he explained that his car had broken down, making it impossible to drive any further. I suggested taking a cab to get back to my daughter, but he insisted that it was too late. It was late for a cab, so I reluctantly agreed, feeling tired and weak. Roy led me into what turned out to be his house. I asked him for painkillers for my headache, but he offered me hot milk instead, which provided some relief. Roy showed me the room where I would be sleeping, and I thanked him before closing the door, feeling comfortable because I believed he was a friend of Chris. I attempted to call Chris, but my phone was dead. I wanted to take a shower, but I had no clothes to change into. I then realized that I had no clothes to change into, so I lay down on the bed in an attempt to rest. During the night, Roy knocked on my door. I opened it to find him standing there, clad only in a towel, completely shirtless with wet hair. Interestingly, he had styled his hair in a similar manner to Chris, while he already bore a striking resemblance to Chris. The resemblance seemed even more pronounced. I asked him what he needed, and he explained that he was searching for his shirt after retrieving it. He noticed that I hadn't taken a shower and offered me his shirt, insisting that I put it on. I felt somewhat dizzy and decided to take a hot bath while I was in the bath. Roy entered the bathroom completely unclothed. I was too stunned to utter a word and too fatigued to move. He simply stood there silently watching me for an extended period. I eventually snapped out of my trance and demanded that he leave. My thoughts turned to Chris and how he would react if he knew I had seen his friend unclothed. Roy ignored my request and proceeded to look at me. I was bewildered, as I was intoxicated, and witnessing his actions felt both wrong and strangely arousing. It did not help that I had been frustrated for over 3 weeks, given Chris's busy schedule in the 2 weeks leading up to his trip. I succumbed to temptation and, before I knew it, I found myself engaging in self. I was aware that my actions were inappropriate and that I should not have done what I did, but once I had initiated contact, I found it difficult to cease. What made the situation more distressing was that Roy bore a striking resemblance to Chris, almost as though I was looking at my husband. Things progressed rapidly and Roy joined me in the tub, and we engaged in physical intimacy. The following morning, waking up next to a stranger, I realized that I had committed a grave mistake, the most significant of my life. My head throbbed with a painful sensation that went beyond a mere hangover. I subsequently discovered that Roy had spiked my drink. Roy then confessed that he had been hired by an unidentified individual to induce me to engage in sexual intercourse with my husband. He claimed that his objective had been achieved and departed the premises, leaving me alone. I was aware that I had consented to this arrangement while under the influence of the medication. Indeed, Roy had provided me with the pills and then promptly departed. I had engaged in sexual intercourse with my husband, believing that I was with him due to the effects of the medication, which accentuated the similarities between them. Upon returning home, I experienced feelings of guilt and shame. It is evident that my daughter is experiencing significant distress as a result of the overwhelming guilt she is currently enduring. Chris had treated me with exceptional courtesy and consideration, yet I had recklessly betrayed his trust. In retrospect, it was a mistake for me to attend the party in the first place, as I had not even had the opportunity to ascertain the identity of the individual who had hired Roy. I was too preoccupied with the depression I am currently experiencing has persisted for a week since I engaged in infidelity with my husband, and it will persist for another week until he returns home. I am uncertain about the appropriate course of action. I have been avoiding all of his calls because I lack the courage to hear his voice. Facing him in a week's time seems daunting. I have shared my story and I am in urgent need of your advice. The act was an accident, yet I still engaged in infidelity. Should I confess the truth or tell a lie? I cannot live with myself in this state of guilt. I am overwhelmed by the weight of my actions. I seek guidance and direction. I feel powerless and overwhelmed. Update. Hi everyone. It has been 5 months since I last wrote. I wanted to share how things have been going. Some of you in the comments called me a fool, and I agree that I deserved it. As soon as Chris returned, I followed most of your advice and confessed the truth. I had never seen such disappointment. He looked at me with pain in his eyes and then stared at me in silence for what seemed like an eternity. It seemed that I had lost all his respect. After a while, he quietly retreated to his study, locking the door for hours. It was the most agonizing time of my life. I cried my heart out, but I refrained from knocking on the door. It would have been selfish of me. He had every right to be angry. I gave him space. I was prepared to accept whatever decision he made, even if it meant him leaving me. I had brought shame upon myself. 2 days later, Chris forwarded a message to me. The message contained pictures of me leaving the party with Roe and detailed what had happened that night. Chris, being a lawyer, enlisted the help of his friends to trace the message back to Anna. She had hired Roy with the intention of sabotaging our relationship. I was furious and, with Chris's assistance, we located Roy. When we threatened to involve the authorities, he led us to Anna during our confrontation. Anna accused me of taking Chris away from her. He had been informed of her past infidelity by me some years previously. She believed this was her way of getting back at me. Roy had turned off my phone and Anna had provided him with personal details about Chris to make her scheme more convincing. It appeared that she had seen all my Instagram posts with Chris and had grown jealous. I was trapped and there was little I could do. I returned home feeling defeated. What was even more surprising was that Chris had asked for a break. He had moved out of the house and we had not divorced. It was a challenging 2 months, but my daughter provided some solace. After 2 months, Chris eventually forgave me, confessing his deep love and saying he could not bear to lose me. I was initially shocked, but I soon felt elated and immensely grateful because I had not expected him to return so soon. We got married with our daughter as the adorable little bride who could barely walk. My life returned to its former state of beauty, and I had my husband by my side. I hope my story can inspire someone and encourage self-reflection. I consider myself fortunate to have a husband willing to forgive me. I am grateful to all those who commented and advised me to tell my husband the truth. I cannot imagine what might have happened if I had not done so. That was an interesting story. Now, let us move on to another, more exciting one. I will provide further details in due course. In April 2015, a catastrophic earthquake struck Nepal. An earthquake measuring 8 on the Richter scale struck Nepal, causing significant seismic activity and resulting in a profound impact on the lives of the Nepalese people, including medical professionals. My fiancé and I were glued to our televisions, witnessing the unfolding of this tragic event. The reports that emerged from the disaster were particularly distressing. A total of 000 people had died and hundreds of thousands were displaced. The scale of the disaster was immense, but for my fiancée, who had family from that region, the tragedy hit even closer to home. Her emotional reaction was palpable, and her deep connection to the affected area was evident in the sadness in her eyes. We had been a couple for 4 years, having first met at a volunteering event in the inner city. Our shared dedication to service was the foundation of our relationship. Despite our demanding schedules, we aspired to build a family together. Our mutual desire to help others was a significant aspect of our bond, and it was her compassion and selflessness that initially attracted me to her. When she heard the news about the earthquake, her kindness and empathy were particularly evident as she responded to calls. I promptly responded, aware that individuals in Nepal were now grappling with the aftermath of the earthquake. Our response was not a mere option, it was an imperative. We had prior experience traveling abroad to assist disaster victims, collaborating with organizations such as Doctors Without Borders. As I contemplated our subsequent actions, I reflected on the numerous occasions we had volunteered together. Our shared objective to alleviate suffering had fostered a strong bond between us. These moments revealed her profound compassion and genuine concern for those in need. We had discussed the possibility of starting a family and building a future together, but life had consistently thwarted that dream. We had even contemplated adopting if having our own children did not materialize. However, the Nepal earthquake crisis compelled us to prioritize making a difference. We felt driven not just to observe but to actively contribute to the relief effort. Our shared responsibility and love for humanity motivated us to help. I was unaware that this would be a pivotal moment not just for those in Nepal but also for our relationship. The gravity of the situation highlighted both her empathy and the strength of our connection. However, Nepal felt far away and my commitments in the US made it difficult for me to leave for the earthquake-affected area. I considered myself adaptable. Despite my ability to live with just a backpack, the responsibilities I had at home felt overwhelming. Practical considerations prevented me from going to Nepal, and I had convinced my fiancé not to go as well. It seemed that contributing financially was our best way to help in the weeks after the earthquake. She was constantly on calls with people from that region, and her deep involvement and passionate discussions about the victims and their suffering evoked a profound sense of empathy in her. She discussed the possibility of providing crucial medical aid in the region, and listening to her, I began to feel a sense of guilt for not being there to help in a more tangible way. Her dedication to making a difference made me feel a moral obligation to act, despite our previous decision to provide financial assistance. Her descriptions vividly illustrated the ongoing struggle and the need for physical assistance. It was evident that she could not cease to dwell on the catastrophe or to let go of its impact. She felt compelled to proceed to Nepal in order to make a direct and significant impact. At that moment, I came to understand that her benevolence and eagerness to assist were not merely the initial factors that had attracted me to her, they constituted fundamental aspects of her identity. Her willingness to embark on this selfless mission filled me with pride for the woman I was engaged to. This was a novel situation in our 4-year relationship. In the 4 years of our relationship, my fiancé was preparing to embark on a mission in Nepal without me. Had my responsibilities in the United States not constituted an obstacle, I would have accompanied her. It was only after I endorsed her decision that I fully grasped the extent of her desire to participate. She rapidly prepared for her journey, even leaving behind several essential items. I suggested postponing the purchase of some items we had ordered online, but her urge to provide assistance was too strong to consider any delays. Just 2 weeks later, the earthquake prompted her to book a flight to Nepal. Her commitment to making a difference and bringing hope to those in need was her primary motivation. I was struck by her selflessness and dedication to easing others' suffering despite the personal risks involved. Once in Nepal, the realities of her rushed departure became evident. She frequently mentioned missing certain items and regretted her hasty exit. I attempted to remind her of the importance of patience and waiting for the items we had ordered, but her immediate needs seemed to overwhelm her. Her mixed heritage and family ties made her quite noticeable in Nepal, which worried me. Supporting her journey financially was a significant commitment, and I was there to provide the necessary resources. Our daily phone calls became a crucial link. Despite her awareness of the necessity for patience and waiting for the items we had ordered, the immediate needs of the situation seemed to overwhelm her. Her mixed heritage and family ties in Nepal made her quite noticeable, which caused me concern. Her visibility raised my concerns about her safety and the possibility of her becoming a target. Providing financial support for her journey was a significant commitment on my part, and I was there to provide the necessary resources. Our daily phone calls became a crucial link. She would frequently inform me of the individuals she had assisted, with a particular focus on the hospital and medical personnel and the necessity for their protection. She elected to reside in a Western hotel situated in a more secure area, a decision that, while somewhat reassuring, did not entirely dispel my concerns regarding her safety as she confronted the challenges of living in a foreign country, distant from the comforts of our shared life. I experienced a complex emotional state, comprising pride in her altruism and concern for her well-being. Despite her initial plan to be in Nepal for 2 weeks, I have come to realize that our communication gradually diminished over time. She soon exhausted her financial resources, and I became her sole source of support, covering all her expenses. She never gave me any reason to doubt her, and I remained unaware of any potential issues. Her trip was extended from 2 weeks to 6, necessitating changes to her return flight and additional supplies. I funded these changes amidst my demanding work schedule. I was unaware of the reduction in our communication and the increasing necessity for financial assistance from her end. My own work schedule was demanding, and time passed rapidly. I found myself at the airport to welcome my fiancée back. The excitement of reuniting was palpable, and we were both looking forward to a deep reconnect in the following days. Our intimacy took on a different dynamic from what we were accustomed to. I would typically be the initiator, but this time, she led. The rationale initially proposed was that our prolonged separation had resulted in a lack of physical intimacy. It was assumed that she had missed my company and was attempting to compensate for the 6 weeks we had been separated. However, the experience of intimacy seemed to lack the genuine emotional expression that had previously characterized our relationship. It was perceived as a mere obligation rather than a spontaneous expression of love. These concerns were dismissed as the result of our long separation and our mutual eagerness to reconnect. I was unaware that there were deeper layers and hidden truths to this shift in our relationship. I accepted her newfound affection without suspecting any hidden reasons behind it. However, about a month after she returned from Nepal, I began to feel that something was off. She was constantly on her phone, even when we were together, seeming distracted as if her mind was far away. Even though she was physically with me, this made me wonder if something significant had happened during her trip. The sense of discomfort persisted for 2 months, during which time she revealed that she was pregnant. I was initially shocked and confused as we had not planned for a pregnancy and she was supposed to be on birth control. I asked how she could have gotten pregnant and she said that she had forgotten to take her pill. However, this explanation did not seem plausible to me as she was usually so responsible and we always had her birth control pills delivered on time. Her story then changed and she explained that being in Nepal had made her realize she wanted to start a family. The earthquake's impact and her work in the hospitals led her to realize that she wanted to start a family. However, her explanation about wanting to start a family after her experience in Nepal was more understandable. I was troubled by the fact that she hadn't discussed such a significant decision with me. We had talked about starting a family, but for her to make this choice on her own was disconcerting. As I processed this, the dynamics of our relationship began to change. I was torn. The joy of expecting a child was offset by unease about the circumstances of her decision. The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship seemed fragile, as though the tremors from Nepal had metaphorically reached us, altering the contours of our life together in unforeseen ways. When I pressed her for a more detailed reason behind her pregnancy, she offered an apology. This apology indicated that something was off, and my gut feeling was that as suspicions grew, I realized that I needed to ascertain the full truth of this unexpected turn of events. When she left her phone unattended to shower, I saw an opportunity to gain further insight. She frequently used WhatsApp to communicate with her family overseas, so I swiftly linked her WhatsApp to my laptop using the QR code. The discoveries I made were astonishing. In Nepal, she had initiated a romantic relationship with a local man. Their messages were replete with expressions of love and they shared non-explicit photos. The explicit photographs of their time together indicated that they were having an affair. However, she appeared to be struggling with the decision, possibly due to concerns about her safety or the realization that it was merely a fantasy. She had been sending him money and it transpired that some of the funds I had provided for her trip were being used to support him. This betrayal weighed heavily on me, leaving me I was overwhelmed by a complex emotional state, comprising anger, hurt and profound disappointment. The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship had been irreparably damaged, and the consequences of our actions had brought us to a crossroads in our lives that I had not foreseen. It took me a few days to process all the information and to understand the full extent of what had occurred. I had to connect the dots to gain a clear picture, which included her subsequent behavior. The trip behavior, the newfound warmth and the shocking disclosure of her affair were the first pieces of the puzzle to fit. However, there was one remaining question: why did she decide to get pregnant? This question was answered when I realized that, during the affair, she may have neglected birth control. This was possibly because she had not intended to be unfaithful initially. With this realization, I confronted her, laying out all the evidence and the timeline of events. She was visibly shaken, I repeatedly inquired as to how long she intended to maintain this deception. She acknowledged that she lacked a clear answer, admitting that she had become caught up in the moment and failed to consider the consequences of her actions. Her shock intensified when I firmly stated that I could not accept what had transpired. She was astonished by the notion that I might abandon her for having an affair and becoming pregnant with another man's child. The woman in question was under the impression that I would remain with her because of the unborn child, almost equating it to the adoption we had once considered. She seemed unable to comprehend the significant difference between going on a trip, having an affair, risking my health with unprotected sex, and coming back pregnant by another man. The seriousness of her actions briefly made me wonder if the child could be mine, but this thought vanished once the full truth emerged. The full truth emerged, and our trust was shattered. This left us both at a crucial juncture, confronting a situation we had never imagined. From her distorted view, she saw the affair as a minor mistake and thought we should raise the child together. I was astounded by her reaction when I decided to leave, despite her pregnancy. She became angry, feeling I had betrayed her. This was an unreal scenario where she saw herself as the victim in the midst. Upon discovering her infidelity, I learned that most of our family and friends were already aware of her pregnancy and believed I was the father. However, once I requested that she leave, the narrative shifted, and I was suddenly perceived as the antagonist. People criticized me for being cruel to a pregnant woman, failing to recognize that the child was not mine. The expectation to man up confounded me. What did that even mean in this context? It was important for me to understand the implications of my actions. It was my belief that the woman in question should be held accountable for her actions and bear the consequences of her actions. I was aware that my friends and family had formed biased views about the situation, and I decided to distance myself from them. I was grateful that my family stood by me, despite their affection for the woman in question. Following our confrontation, she was unable to provide a clear explanation for her actions. She stated that she still loved me, but this seemed hollow to me, given the depth of the betrayal. Although she professed to love me, I perceived her words as hollow in the wake of such a profound betrayal. I interpreted her actions as deceptive and hurtful. My father counseled me that this was an important lesson, and he reminded me that we were not yet married. This made the dissolution of our relationship somewhat simpler. After our separation, she clung to the hope that I might reconsider and reunite with her when she finally understood that this was not going to happen. She attempted to. The actions of my former partner negatively impacted my professional life by sending messages to some of my colleagues. Fortunately, the majority of them recognized her deceit and stood by me. The entire ordeal has been exceedingly challenging. I did love her and, in some ways, I still do. It has been a traumatic experience. I had never before considered it possible to love someone so much and then be betrayed in such a terrible manner. This betrayal has made me cautious and hesitant to enter into another serious relationship. The emotional scars from this experience are deep, and I am aware that the process of healing will take time.